The box slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor and shattering the fragile piece of our new home. I froze, waiting for the inevitable. "Sarah?" Helen's shrill voice pierced the air. "What on earth are you doing up there?" I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and plastered on a smile before descending the stairs. "I'm so sorry, Helen. It was an accident. I'll clean it up right away." My mother-in-law stood at the bottom of the staircase, arms crossed, her lips pursed in disapproval. "Honestly, Sarah, you'd think you'd be more careful with our things. This isn't some college dorm room, you know." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that this was temporary. Adam and I just needed to save up enough for our own place. Then we'd be free. Speaking of Adam, where was he? My husband had conveniently disappeared the moment we'd arrived at his parents' house this morning. "Where's Adam?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Helen waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, his father needed help with something in the garage. You know how men are with their projects." I did know. It was amazing how many projects Adam managed to find whenever there was actual work to be done. "Well, I'd better get that mess cleaned up," I said, turning to head back upstairs. Helen's voice stopped me. "Wait just a minute, Sarah. While you're up there, you might as well start unpacking your things. I've cleared out some space in the guest room closet for you and Adam." I blinked in surprise. The guest room? But I thought we'd be staying in Adam's old room. Helen's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, honey, that room is much too small for 2 people. Besides, I use it as my sewing room now. The guest room will be much more comfortable for you both." I opened my mouth to argue, but thought better of it. This was Helen's house, after all. "Of course," I said instead. "Thank you for your hospitality." As I climbed the stairs, I could hear Helen muttering something about ungrateful children and "in my day." I gritted my teeth and kept moving. The guest room was small and stuffy, with floral wallpaper that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. A narrow double bed took up most of the space, leaving barely enough room for our suitcases. I sighed and started picking up the shards of the broken vase, careful not to cut myself. As I worked, I heard the front door open and Adam's voice drift up the stairs. "Mom? Sarah? I'm back!" "In here, sweetie," Helen called out. "Your wife had a little accident with one of my vases. Why don't you go help her clean up?" I rolled my eyes. Of course, she'd throw me under the bus. Adam appeared in the doorway, looking sheepish. "Hey, babe, need a hand?" I looked up at him, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Where have you been?" He shrugged. "Dad needed help with the lawnmower. You know how it is." "Right," I said, turning back to my task. "Well, since you're here, you can start unpacking. Your mom says we're staying in the guest room." Adam's brow furrowed. "The guest room? But I thought—" "Your old room is her sewing room now, apparently," I cut him off. "Oh," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Well, I'm sure it'll be fine. It's just temporary, right?" I stood up, dumping the broken pieces into the trash. "Right, temporary." As I brushed past him to wash my hands, Adam caught my arm. "Hey," he said softly. "I know this isn't ideal, but we'll make it work. I promise." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as I looked into his eyes, all I could see was the same weakness that had led us here in the first place. The sound of Helen calling us down to dinner broke the moment. Adam squeezed my hand and headed downstairs, leaving me alone in the tiny room that was supposed to be our new home. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was sure to be a long and trying evening. As I reached for the doorknob, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired, defeated. "Come on, Sarah," I whispered to myself. "You can do this. It's just temporary." But even as I said the words, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered, "What if it's not?" The world came into focus slowly, like an old television warming up. Harsh, fluorescent lights burned my eyes, and the antiseptic smell of a hospital filled my nostrils. I blinked, trying to make sense of my surroundings. "Sarah, can you hear me?" A man's voice, unfamiliar yet tinged with concern. I turned my head, wincing at the dull ache. A doctor stood beside my bed, clipboard in hand. Behind him I could see my parents, James and Elizabeth, their faces etched with worry. "What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. The doctor leaned in. "You fainted at home and hit your head. Your mother-in-law called an ambulance." "Mother-in-law?" I frowned, searching my memory. Nothing. "Sarah," my mom said, stepping forward. How are you feeling, sweetheart? I managed a weak smile. Confused. What day is it? It's Tuesday, my dad answered. You've been out for about 6 hours. Tuesday. Okay, that made sense. I remembered going to work on Monday, but after that, nothing. Where's Adam? I asked, the name coming to me suddenly. My husband. But when I tried to picture his face, my mind drew a blank. My parents exchanged a glance. He's in the waiting room with Helen, my mom said carefully. Do you want us to get them? Helen, another name without a face. I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. I can't remember them. Mom, Dad, what's happening to me? The doctor stepped in, his voice calm and reassuring. Sarah, I believe you're experiencing a form of psychogenic amnesia. It's often triggered by stress or traumatic events. Your memory loss seems to be specific to your husband and mother-in-law. Can you tell me the last thing you remember clearly? I closed my eyes, concentrating. Work. I remember being at work on Monday. After that, it's fuzzy. Interesting, the doctor murmured, making a note on his clipboard. Sarah, I'd like to run a few more tests if that's all right with you. I nodded, still trying to process what was happening. As the doctor left to arrange the tests, my parents moved closer to the bed. Honey, my dad said, his voice low, is there anything you want to tell us? Anything that might have caused this stress? I looked at him, confused. What do you mean? My mom took my hand, her eyes searching mine. Sarah, we've been worried about you. Ever since you moved in with Adam and Helen, you've seemed different, withdrawn. We thought maybe it was just the adjustment period, but now... Her words trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. I shook my head, frustrated by the gaps in my memory. I don't know. I can't remember. Just then, a commotion in the hallway caught our attention. A man's voice, angry and insistent, grew louder as it approached my room. I don't care what the doctor said. That's my wife in there, and I have a right to see her. The door burst open, and a man I didn't recognize stormed in, followed closely by an older woman. They both stopped short when they saw me, their expressions a mix of relief and something else I couldn't quite place. Sarah, the man said, moving towards the bed. Thank God you're awake. We've been so worried. I recoiled instinctively, pressing myself back against the pillows. Who are you? The man's face fell, hurt and confusion flashing in his eyes. Sarah, it's me, Adam, your husband. The older woman stepped forward, her lips pursed. And I'm Helen, your mother-in-law. Surely you remember us? I looked from one to the other, searching for any spark of recognition. Nothing, just a vague sense of unease that I couldn't explain. I'm sorry, I whispered. I can't remember you. Adam reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Something in his touch felt wrong, almost threatening. He frowned, exchanging a loaded glance with Helen. It's okay, sweetheart, Helen said, her voice sickly sweet. We'll help you remember. Once you're home with us, I'm sure everything will come back to you. A chill ran down my spine at her words. Home with them? The very thought filled me with a nameless dread. I looked to my parents, silently pleading for help. My dad stepped forward, placing himself between me and the strangers who claimed to be my family. I think, he said firmly, that Sarah needs some rest. Perhaps it would be best if you came back later. Adam opened his mouth to argue, but Helen placed a hand on his arm. Of course, she said smoothly. We'll be back tomorrow, Sarah. Don't worry about a thing. As they left the room, I caught a glimpse of Adam's face. The look in his eyes sent a shiver through me. It wasn't love or concern I saw there. It was anger. And beneath that, something darker still. The hospital room felt like a sanctuary as I recovered. My parents a constant, comforting presence. But the peace couldn't last forever. After 3 days, the doctors declared me fit to go home. The question was, where exactly was home? You're coming with us, sweetheart, Mom said firmly as she helped me pack. Until you get your memories back, you need to be somewhere safe and familiar. I nodded, relief washing over me. The thought of going back to a house I couldn't remember, with people who felt like strangers, terrified me. As we prepared to leave, Adam and Helen arrived. The sight of them still sent an inexplicable chill down my spine. Sarah, darling, Helen cooed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. We've come to take you home. I instinctively stepped closer to my father. Actually, I'm going to stay with my parents for a while. Adam's face darkened. That's ridiculous. You belong with us, your family. We are her family, Dad interjected, his voice steely. And right now, this is what Sarah needs. The tension in the room was palpable. Adam opened his mouth to argue, but Helen laid a hand on his arm. "Of course," she said smoothly. "We understand. But we'll be visiting every day, won't we, Adam? To help jog your memory." Something in her tone made me shudder. As they left, I caught a glimpse of Adam's face. The look he gave me was one of pure, cold fury. Back at my parents' house, I sank into the familiar comfort of my childhood bedroom. But even here, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Mom, Dad," I said over dinner that night, "I need to know the truth. What was my life like with Adam and Helen?" They exchanged a worried glance. "Honey," Mom began carefully, "we don't want to influence your memories. The doctor said—" "Please," I interrupted, "I need to know." Dad sighed heavily. "We were worried about you, Sarah. You seemed different, withdrawn. When we'd visit, Helen was always hovering, and Adam, well, he didn't seem like the man you married." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "He was controlling," Mom said softly. "Always speaking for you, making decisions. And Helen, she treated you more like a servant than a daughter-in-law." The words hit me like a physical blow. Flashes of memory started to surface. Helen's critical voice, Adam's tight grip on my arm, the constant feeling of walking on eggshells. "I need to know more," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to remember." Dad leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sarah, we have an idea. It's risky, but it might help us uncover the truth." He explained their plan, to secretly record Adam and Helen's conversations when they visited. It was a violation of privacy, possibly even illegal, but at that moment, I didn't care. "Let's do it," I said firmly. The next day, when Adam and Helen arrived, we were ready. Tiny microphones hidden throughout the living room captured every word. I played my part, feigning confusion and vulnerability. "I'm trying to remember," I said, my voice deliberately weak, "but everything's still so fuzzy." Helen patted my hand, her nails digging in slightly. "Don't worry, dear, we'll have you back home soon enough." "Yes," Adam added, his voice low and intense. "Where you belong." As they left, I caught Helen whispering to Adam, "We need to get her back quickly, before she remembers too much." That night, we gathered around the kitchen table to listen to the recordings. My hands shook as Dad pressed play. Helen's voice, sharp and clear. "We need to be careful. If she remembers how we treated her—" Adam, angry. "She won't, and if she does, we'll make sure she knows her place." I listened, horror growing with each word. The casual cruelty, the plans to isolate me further, the thinly veiled threats. It was all there. As the recording ended, I looked up at my parents, tears streaming down my face. "Oh, God," I whispered. "What do I do now?" Dad's expression was grim. "We fight back. It's time to show Adam and Helen that they can't control you anymore." In that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear and confusion gave way to a burning anger. I nodded, my jaw set. "You're right," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in days. "It's time to take back my life." The next morning, I woke with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. The recordings had confirmed my worst fears, but they'd also ignited a fire within me. I was done being a victim. "I want to go back," I announced over breakfast. Mom nearly choked on her coffee. "What, Sarah, you can't be serious." "I am," I said firmly. "We need more evidence." And I hesitated, then plunged on. "I need to face them, to remember everything." Dad's face was grim. "It's dangerous, sweetheart. What if they suspect something?" I squared my shoulders. "Then I'll deal with it, but I can't hide forever." After hours of debate and careful planning, we agreed. I'd return to Adam and Helen's house, wearing a hidden microphone. At the first sign of trouble, I'd use a code word, and my parents would come immediately. As we pulled up to the house, my supposed home, my heart raced. Adam and Helen were waiting on the porch, all smiles and false warmth. "Sarah, darling," Helen exclaimed, enveloping me in a suffocating hug. "We've missed you so much." Adam's embrace was stiff, his eyes cold despite his smile. "Welcome home, honey." I forced myself to smile back, fighting the urge to run. "Thank you. I'm glad to be back." The next few hours were a masterclass in gaslighting. Helen fussed over me, her saccharine concern barely masking her impatience. Adam hovered nearby, his presence a constant unspoken threat. "You must be exhausted, dear," Helen said, steering me towards the stairs. "Why don't you lie down for a bit? I'll bring you some tea." I nodded, grateful for the chance to be alone. But as I reached the top of the stairs, a wave of dizziness hit me. Memories flooded back, Helen's shrill voice berating me, Adam's iron grip on my arm as he dragged me up these very steps. I stumbled, catching myself on the railing. Adam was beside me in an instant, his hand on my back feeling more like a shove than support. "Careful, honey," he said, his voice low. "We wouldn't want you to have another accident." The threat in his tone was unmistakable. I shuddered, suddenly certain that my fainting spell hadn't been an accident at all. In the guest room, our room, I reminded myself, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm my racing heart. The walls seemed to close in around me, years of suppressed memories threatening to overwhelm me. A soft knock at the door made me jump. Helen entered, carrying a steaming cup of tea. "Here you are, dear," she said, handing me the cup. "This should help you relax." I took a small sip, more out of politeness than thirst. The tea had an odd, bitter aftertaste that set alarm bells ringing in my head. "Thank you," I managed, setting the cup aside. "I think I'll try to sleep now." Helen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. Sweet dreams, Sarah." As soon as the door closed behind her, I dumped the tea into a potted plant. Whatever was in that drink, I was certain it wasn't meant to help me. I lay down, pretending to sleep, straining my ears for any sound. After what felt like hours, I heard hushed voices in the hallway. "She's out cold," Helen whispered. The sedative worked quickly. "Good," Adam replied. "Now we can discuss how to handle this situation. We can't risk her remembering anything else." My blood ran cold. They had drugged me, and from the sound of it, they were planning something far worse. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking as I typed out a message to my parents. Code red, "Come now." As I hit send, the bedroom door creaked open. I quickly closed my eyes, feigning sleep, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. "Poor, confused Sarah." Helen's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Don't worry, dear. We'll make sure you never have to worry about remembering again." In that moment, I knew I had to act. Whatever they had planned, I couldn't wait for rescue. It was time to save myself. My heart pounded as I lay there, feigning sleep, while Adam and Helen whispered just outside the door. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to remain still, listening intently. "We need to move quickly," Adam muttered. "Her parents are getting suspicious. If they start digging..." Helen's voice was cold and calculating. "Don't worry, I have a plan. We'll make it look like an accident." Poor, confused Sarah, still dizzy from her fall. I suppressed a gasp. They were planning to kill me. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me. This wasn't just about emotional abuse or control anymore. My life was in danger. As their footsteps retreated down the hall, I cautiously opened my eyes. The room spun slightly. Whatever they'd put in that tea was strong. But I couldn't afford to be weak now. I had to get out. Slowly, carefully, I eased myself off the bed. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to stand. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. Silence. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle and peered out into the hallway, empty. I made my way down the stairs, clinging to the railing for support. As I reached the bottom, a cacophony of memories assaulted me. Helen's shrill voice berating me for every perceived slight. Adam's tight grip on my arm as he dragged me from room to room. The constant feeling of worthlessness and fear that had become my daily existence. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. There would be time for that later. Right now, I needed to focus on survival. I was halfway to the front door when I heard them coming. Panic surged through me as I looked around frantically for a hiding place. The coat closet, it was my only option. I dove inside, pulling the door closed just as Adam and Helen entered the foyer. "I'll check upstairs," Adam said. "You look down here." My breath caught in my throat as Helen's footsteps approached the closet. I pressed myself against the wall, praying she wouldn't open the door. "Sarah?" Helen called out, her voice sickly sweet. "Where are you, dear? We're worried about you." The doorknob turned, and I braced myself for discovery. But at that moment, a loud crash came from upstairs. "Helen!" Adam shouted. "She's not here." Helen cursed under her breath and hurried away. I allowed myself a moment of relief before reality set in. They knew I was gone. I had to move now. I burst out of the closet and ran for the door, fumbling with the lock. Just as I got it open, a hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. Adam's face was contorted with rage. "Where do you think you're going?" I didn't think. I just reacted. My knee came up hard, connecting with his groin. As he doubled over in pain, I shoved him aside and bolted out the door. The cool night air hit my face as I ran down the driveway. I could hear Helen screaming behind me, but I didn't look back. I just ran, my bare feet slapping against the pavement, my lungs burning with each breath. I didn't stop until I reached the end of the street. Gasping for air, I finally allowed myself to look back. The house loomed in the distance, dark and menacing, but there was no sign of Adam or Helen pursuing me. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, dialing my parents' number. "Dad," I choked out when he answered. "I need help. Please come get me." As I waited for my parents to arrive, huddled in the shadows of a neighbor's hedge, the full impact of what had happened hit me. The life I thought I knew was a lie. My husband and mother-in-law had not only abused me, but had been planning to kill me. Tears streamed down my face, a mix of fear, relief, and overwhelming grief. But beneath it all, a steely resolve was forming. I had escaped, but this wasn't over. Adam and Helen needed to pay for what they'd done. As my parents' car pulled up, I made a decision. I would not be a victim anymore. It was time to fight back, to reclaim my life, and ensure that Adam and Helen could never hurt anyone else again. With renewed determination, I stood up, ready to face whatever came next. The battle for my freedom and my life had only just begun. The law office felt like a fortress, a sanctuary from the storm raging outside. I sat across from Linda Pearson, the divorce attorney my parents had recommended, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. "Sarah," Linda said, her voice gentle but firm, "I want you to understand that what we're about to do won't be easy. Adam and Helen won't go down without a fight." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I know, but I can't let them win, not after everything they've done." Linda spread out the documents before me, police reports, medical records, and transcripts of the recordings we'd made. Seeing it all laid out like this, the full extent of the abuse I'd endured hit me anew. "We have a strong case," Linda assured me. "The evidence of emotional and physical abuse is overwhelming. And with the attempted drugging and, well, what sounds like a murder plot, we can push for criminal charges as well." My stomach churned at her words. It still seemed surreal that my own husband had been planning to kill me, but the fear that gripped me was all too real. "What if they come after me?" I whispered, voicing the fear that had haunted me since my escape. Linda's eyes hardened. "That's why we're filing for an emergency restraining order along with the divorce papers. They won't be able to come near you without facing serious consequences." As I signed paper after paper, a mix of emotions washed over me. Relief, fear, anger, and a glimmer of hope. This was it. I was finally taking back control of my life. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. Adam and Helen, true to form, fought the divorce with everything they had. They denied all allegations, painting me as mentally unstable and ungrateful. But I refused to back down. With each deposition, each piece of evidence presented, I grew stronger. The recordings we'd made were damning, and several neighbors came forward with accounts of hearing arguments and seeing bruises on me. Then, just as it seemed we were making progress, disaster struck. I was leaving my therapist's office when I saw him, Adam, leaning against my car, his face a mask of false concern. "Sarah," he called out, taking a step towards me. "Please, we need to talk. This has all gotten out of hand." I froze, my heart pounding. He wasn't supposed to be here. The restraining order. "Stay back," I warned, fumbling for my phone. "I'm calling the police." Adam's face darkened. "You ungrateful bitch," he snarled, lunging forward. I turned to run, but he caught my arm, spinning me around. The familiar fear threatened to paralyze me, but something inside me snapped. I was done being a victim. With all my strength, I shoved him away. "No," I shouted, my voice echoing in the parking lot. "You don't get to control me anymore." Adam stumbled back, shock written across his face. For a moment, we stood there, staring at each other. Then, the sound of sirens broke the silence. As the police car pulled into the lot, Adam's expression changed from shock to fury. "This isn't over," he hissed before turning and running. I collapsed against my car, shaking uncontrollably as the officers approached. In the chaos that followed, giving statements calling Linda and my parents, one thought kept running through my mind. Adam was right. This wasn't over. That night, as I lay in bed at my parents' house, surrounded by the comfort of my childhood room, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Adam's words echoed in my mind, a sinister promise of things to come. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. With trembling fingers, I opened it. "You can't hide forever, Sarah. One way or another, I'll make you pay for this." I stared at the screen, a cold fear gripping my heart. Adam had found a way around the restraining order, a way to reach me. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that he wouldn't stop until he had his revenge. As I called the police to report the threat, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. The divorce, the legal proceedings, they were just the opening salvo. The true test of my strength and resilience lay ahead. Tomorrow, I would face Adam and Helen in court for the first time since filing for divorce. And I knew, deep in my bones, that it would be the fight of my life. The courthouse loomed before me, its stone facade a silent witness to countless battles. Today, it would bear witness to mine. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I climbed the steps, my parents and Linda flanking me like protective sentries. "Remember," Linda whispered as we approached the courtroom, "stay calm. No matter what they say, we have the truth on our side." I nodded, squaring my shoulders. The truth. It had become my armor, my weapon against the lies that had imprisoned me for so long. As we entered the courtroom, I saw them. Adam and Helen, sitting with their lawyer, looking every inch the concerned husband and mother-in-law. The sight of them made my stomach churn, but I refused to let them see my fear. The judge called the court to order, and the battle began. Adam's lawyer painted a picture of me as an unstable, ungrateful wife, twisting my amnesia into a sign of mental instability. Helen dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, the perfect image of a distraught mother. But then it was our turn. Linda presented the evidence methodically, relentlessly, the recordings, the medical reports, the testimonies from neighbors and co-workers. With each piece of evidence, I could see Adam and Helen's facades cracking. When it was time for me to testify, I felt a sudden calm wash over me. This was my moment to reclaim my voice, my truth. "Sarah," Linda began, "can you tell the court about your life with Adam and Helen?" I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them everything. The constant criticism, the isolation, the fear that had become my constant companion. As I spoke, I could feel the weight of those years lifting from my shoulders. "And the night you left," Linda prompted. "What happened?" I recounted that terrifying night, my voice growing stronger with each word. "They drugged me," I said, looking directly at Adam and Helen. "And I heard them planning to make my death look like an accident." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Adam's face contorted with rage, while Helen's mask of concern slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. As I finished my testimony, Adam suddenly leapt to his feet. "She's lying," he shouted, his face red with fury. "You ungrateful bitch, after everything we've done for you." The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but Adam was beyond control. He lunged towards me, his eyes wild with hatred. Everything seemed to slow down. I saw the bailiff moving to intercept Adam, my father rising from his seat, Linda's hand on my arm. But in that moment I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, meeting Adam's gaze without fear. "No more," I said, my voice ringing clear through the chaos. "You don't control me anymore." Adam froze, shock replacing the rage in his eyes. In that moment I saw him for what he truly was, a small, pathetic man whose power existed only through fear and manipulation. The bailiff restrained Adam, and the judge called for a recess. As Adam was led away, still shouting threats, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm I had feared for so long had finally broken, and I was still standing. During the recess, Linda pulled me aside, her face grave. "Sarah, Adam's outburst might have just won our case, but it's also made him more dangerous. We need to be prepared for anything." I nodded, the reality of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just about winning in court anymore. It was about survival. As we prepared to re-enter the courtroom, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. One way or another, you'll pay." I showed the message to Linda and my parents. Their faces paled, but I felt a steely resolve settle over me. Adam was right about one thing. This wasn't over. But I was done being the victim in this story. "Let's finish this," I said, squaring my shoulders and pushing open the courtroom doors. As I walked back to the stand, I could feel Adam's eyes boring into me, promising retribution. But for the first time, his gaze didn't fill me with fear. Instead, I felt a fierce determination. Whatever came next, whatever Adam had planned, I would face it. Because I had finally found something stronger than fear, the power of my own voice and the truth it carried. The judge called the court back to order, and I took my seat, ready for whatever came next. The final battle was about to begin, and this time I intended to win. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, its contents carrying the weight of my past and the promise of my future. I took a deep breath and opened it, my eyes scanning the official document inside. Divorce granted. It was over. A wave of emotions washed over me, relief, joy, and a hint of sadness for the life I'd once dreamed of. But mostly, I felt free. "Sarah," my mom's voice called from downstairs, "there's someone here to see you." Curious, I made my way down, the divorce papers still clutched in my hand. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. Helen stood in the entryway, looking smaller and older than I remembered. "Hello, Sarah," she said, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. I came to apologize." For a moment I couldn't speak. After everything that had happened, all the pain and fear, here she was, standing in my parents' house. "Why now?" I finally managed to ask. Helen's eyes filled with tears. "I've lost everything. Adam, he's in jail. The truth about what we did to you, it destroyed our family. And I realized too late that I was the architect of that destruction." I listened as Helen poured out her regrets, her realization of the toxic environment she'd created, the way she'd enabled and encouraged Adam's abuse. It was surreal, hearing the woman who had tormented me for years admit to her wrongs. When she finished, silence hung between us. I thought about all the times I dreamed of this moment, imagined what I'd say if Helen ever apologized, but now, faced with the reality, I felt nothing, no anger, no satisfaction, just a calm certainty. "Thank you for your apology, Helen," I said, my voice steady. "I hope you find peace, but I can't be part of your journey to find it. Goodbye." As I closed the door behind her, I felt the last chains of my past fall away. I was truly free now, not just legally, but emotionally. The next few months were a whirlwind of change and growth. I reconnected with old friends, started traveling, and discovered new passions I'd never had the freedom to explore before. With each new experience, I felt myself growing stronger, more confident. But something was still missing. I found myself thinking about other women who might be trapped in situations like mine, feeling alone and helpless. That's when I decided to start the support group. Our first meeting was small, just 5 women gathered in a community center room. As I shared my story, I saw recognition and hope dawn in their eyes. For the first time, they realized they weren't alone. Week by week, our group grew. Women from all walks of life, each with their own story of survival. Together, we laughed, cried, and slowly, steadily began to heal. One evening, as I was locking up after a particularly powerful session, a young woman approached me. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a determined set to her jaw. "I'm leaving him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "After hearing your story, I know I can do it. Thank you for showing me it's possible." In that moment, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This was why I'd survived, why I'd fought so hard. Not just for myself, but for her, and for all the others who needed to know they weren't alone. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the fear, the moments of despair, but also the strength I'd found, the support I'd received, and the new purpose I'd discovered. I pulled into my driveway, my own home, bought with my own money, filled with my own choices. As I stepped inside, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was strong, confident, and free. I smiled at my reflection, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over me. My past no longer defined me. I had reclaimed my identity, my voice, my life. And now I was using that voice to help others do the same. This wasn't just a new chapter in my life. It was a whole new book, and I was the author. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them, because I had faced my darkest fears and emerged victorious. As I settled into my favorite chair, I opened my laptop and began to type. "My name is Sarah," I wrote, "and this is my story of survival, hope, and the power of finding your own voice." The cursor blinked, waiting for the words to flow, and flow they did, carrying with them the promise of healing, not just for me, but for all those who would read them, and find the courage to write their own new beginnings.